Hey guys, Abel here, back with another video, and in today's video I want to talk about a topic which I don't enjoy talking about very much, but I do feel like it's a type of video which I have to do at least once a year because it's such a big problem in our little fitness circles, and that is this cycle of binging and restricting, which is something that a lot of people are experiencing in the fitness world and is not talked about enough, unfortunately. And basically, the type of issue that I'm talking about here is when people go on a diet, try to restrict, try to adhere to that calorie deficit, but they cannot do it for too long because they fall off the wagon, go on a couple of binges, and then of course they are trying to fix that by restricting again, but then they are falling off the wagon again and binging again. And basically the end result of this is that they are getting all the negative aspects of dieting, which is tons of diet fatigue, mental burnout, not feeling ready to diet, being completely burnt out on dieting, but they are getting none of the positive aspects of dieting, which is being lean. And in my eyes, that's really the saddest situation that you can end up in with regards to fitness, at least, because if you're diet fatigued, then at least get your rewards for that diet fatigue, which is being lean and looking the way you want. Or if you're not walking around lean, then that's also fine, but then at least enjoy yourself, be happy, go out with your friends, have great meals, enjoy good food, all of that good stuff. But this in-between miserable state when you're diet fatigued and you're not lean, that's really terrible. So this is what I want to talk about. And first of all, I want to tell you a brief story, which I think I may have mentioned before, but perhaps I should elaborate on it a bit more. So some years ago, maybe 5 years ago or so, sometime around 2015, at one point I got lean. Let's just start here. I could go back further in time because my issues were in the making even before that, but let's start here. So I got lean, I completed a diet, I looked pretty good. Maybe I will be able to find a picture that I can put up in here. And my plan was to go on a lean gaining phase. So I started eating a small surplus, everything was all good. And then 1 or 2 days into this lean gaining phase, I went on a binge. And it was a really bad binge. Unfortunately, it was one of those binges where I had the first overeating period relatively early on in the day, so I had still tons of time left from that day to make an even bigger mess. So I had a couple more binges by the time I went to bed, and by the end of the day, I put down maybe 12, 15,000 calories or something ridiculous. It was just a complete disaster. And at that point, I was like, man, I cannot start my gaining phase off like this. I mean, I was in such a good spot with my lean physique. I need to start with a blank slate. So you know what? Let's fix this by doing a couple of days of mini cutting, or maybe a week of mini cutting. So I started off with that, and a couple of days into that mini cut, I binged again. And at this point, I was like, man, now I will need 2 weeks of mini cutting because now I really made a big mess out of this. So I started off with that, and after a couple of days, I ended up binging again. And basically, this was the cycle that I ended up repeating God knows how many times for the next 2 months or so. And by the end of that, of course, I ended up accumulating a fair amount of body fat because, I couldn't really make up for these binges in the upcoming days, and these binges became more and more frequent. So I ended up putting on a fair amount of fluff. And at this point, I was like, man, now I cannot do just a mini cut. Now I will actually need a proper cut. And of course, at this point, it was much harder to put trust in myself. Like, man, how many mini cuts did I plan out in this past 2 months? And I ended up binging again and again. So how could I actually commit to a proper diet? But I really pumped myself up. I even remember sitting down with a cup of coffee and journaled. I wrote down my thoughts and planned out how this upcoming couple of months will look like. So I will complete this diet over maybe 2-3 months. And then I'm going to go into this lean gaining phase after that for many, many months, and it will be amazing. And during the diet itself, I will develop these new eating habits, and I will fix my mindset, and it's going to be so good. So I really try to motivate myself. I hype myself up. And you know what? I actually managed to complete the diet. I adhere to a calorie deficit for 8, maybe 12 weeks, I don't exactly remember, but I didn't cheat on my diet once. I put my head down. It was really hard to get going, but I finished the diet. I got really nice and lean, and once again, I was ready for a gaining phase. And guess what happened when I went into that gaining phase after, I think, the first or the second day? I binged again, of course, needless to say. What else could have happened, and why was that the case? Well, like I said in the beginning, my issues were kind of in the making with regards to relationship with food and my eating habits even before this. And of course, the prior 2 months of binging and restricting kind of cycles didn't do me any good either. So I was really not in a good spot mentally. I could motivate myself to complete this 2-3 month long diet, and my eyes were really on the prize. But as soon as that clear goal was removed, then I had nothing to motivate me to keep being reasonable and somewhat disciplined with my nutrition. So I just fell off the wagon again and binged again. And basically the same exact cycle started repeating itself again. So I had frequent binges, I was trying to restrict in the meantime, and that once again ended up repeating itself for the next 2-3 months. One thing I think is worth pointing out here is that the fact that I could manage to complete this 2-3 month long diet after going through these binging and restricting cycles so many times is actually a pretty big feat. Not to pat myself in the back too much, but I don't think that many people would be able to pull that off in that state. I mean, I was really not in a good headspace with regards to dieting. I accumulated tons of diet fatigue by that point. My relationship with food was completely messed up, but still I could pump myself up and complete a strict, multiple month-long dieting phase. But that still didn't mean long-term success. It still didn't mean that my problems were solved. As soon as the diet was over and I didn't have that clear goal anymore, I fell right back into my old destructive patterns. So that's just something that I want to point out, that just because you're able to pump yourself up to complete a diet, that doesn't necessarily mean that the long-term success is guaranteed if your head is really not in a good space. Continuing forward from here, like I said, I ended up repeating this same binging, restricting type cycle for the next 2-3 months. And at this point, I basically put on maybe 8, 9, maybe even 10 kilograms more body fat compared to the very beginning of this entire cycle. So now I could basically look back at a good 6-7 month long time frame in which, again, I put on maybe 10 kilograms of body fat. And essentially, I was always on a diet throughout this whole time. I had these binges in between every couple of days or at least once a week, which made me accumulate incrementally more and more body fat. But if you look at the overall trend, at least 80% of that was strict dieting. So essentially, I was living the life of a dieting person. And at this point, it was incredibly infuriating, frustrating, and just really, really sad to look back at what I actually did, because I was not enjoying myself. I was turning down tons of social opportunities. I was missing out on tons of good things that life had to offer because I was trying to adhere to a diet. On paper, that was the plan. So I was really trying to arrange the circumstances so that I could succeed with the diet. But because I was binging too frequently, I was not getting the results. I was not getting leaner. In fact, I was getting gradually fatter. And at this point, I actually even did the math in my head and realized that, man, if from the very, very beginning of this entire binging, restricting, then the whole diet, and then the binging and restricting, if instead of all of that, I just would have been in a 500 calorie surplus throughout this whole time, every single day of the week, which 500 calories is a pretty hefty surplus. For most people, I would not be recommending that much. But even if I did that, I would basically be in the exact same situation, at least with regards to body fat gain. In fact, probably it would have been slightly better, or maybe even a lot better, because at least it would have been a constant surplus. My training would have been amazing. My recovery would have been amazing. I would have no food issues whatsoever. In fact, probably at this point, I would be like, man, please let me cut a little bit. I don't want to eat this much. Let me go into that calorie deficit so I can give my GI tract a break finally or something. So I would have been in such a better spot. I would have none of this diet fatigue. And instead, I was always dieting and I was still way, way fatter than what I started. So basically, this is the situation that I'm talking about here, where you can end up if you cannot get yourself out of this binge restrict cycle, which a lot of people are stuck in. Now, of course, you can come back at this and say, okay, Abel, but you're so messed up. Most people are not as messed up as you were at this time. And you know what? You're probably right. I really hope that you're right. But I can guarantee you that at least one person will comment under this video and say that you're exactly describing my exact situation. And that will go to show that this is not unheard of, at least in the fitness world. In fact, I would say it's unfortunately pretty common. So What you have to understand about all of this is what you're doing when you're binging and restricting very frequently and you're repeating this cycle. Basically, you're mimicking what someone would do in a hunter-gatherer environment, or maybe even a wild animal in nature who is going through legitimate feast and famine cycles. I mean, in nature, what would happen? Basically, you would not have food for days or maybe even weeks. And finally, you're finding some source of calories. Maybe it's a fruit tree or some honey or some animal that you finally managed to kill. And what do you do in that case? You binge. You eat as much as you physically can. You're not trying to stop eating when you're just comfortably full. You don't stop eating when you had just enough. No, you're trying to stuff yourself as much as you can and actually try to put on some body fat so that you can actually survive and have the energy to then go back and hunt and gather and scavenge and do all of those things again. And basically, that is exactly what you're mimicking with these binging and restricting cycles. Now, in the wild, these animals and these humans that are doing this tend to be pretty healthy and pretty lean because the restriction part of this whole thing actually takes care of itself. The mini cutting that they do after the binging is not a choice. That's something that's inevitable because they don't get to freaking eat because they are in the wild. Now, when you're binging and restricting, you're basically mimicking the same exact thing. You're depriving yourself of calories purposefully, and then when you have food, you're binging. And then actually, if you think about it, your exact plan is to repeat the hunter-gatherer type strategy. You're telling yourself that, okay, just this one last time I'm gonna binge, but then from tomorrow onwards, I'm going on a protein-sparing modified fast or something like that. And basically what we are trying to do in the fitness world when we are trying to help people staying leaner, resetting that body fat settling point, kind of making a leaner state a more natural way of being for people is in a way, tricking the brain into thinking that, okay, even though you're lean, you don't have a lot of body fat, you're actually constantly well fed. And that's why we are trying to smartly add back in calories after a diet. That's why we are doing all of these things. And that's why we have these recommendations of, okay, you should at least be spending, 4 or 5 times as much time bulking or at least maintaining or lean gaining as you're doing dieting. Because if you're constantly dieting, you're kind of always teaching your brain or conditioning your brain into thinking that we are always in this deprived kind of famine-like state. Now, what do you do if you're already in this state? If it's too late, the damage is done, you've been in this cycle for months and months on end, you're completely burnt out, what's the right solution? To try to amend this by dieting again? I don't think so. You know what they say about doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result? Right? So probably that's not the right solution. Now, before I go into what I actually think the right solution is, one other thing that's also good to understand is that diet fatigue is basically the currency that you're spending when you're dieting. If you're doing a very, very long diet, you're gonna be pretty diet fatigued by the end. Even if you're doing a shorter diet, but a very harsh diet with a very aggressive calorie deficit, you're also going to be somewhat diet fatigued by the end. Of course, it's all scaled by duration and assertiveness. If you're just doing a short diet that is not very assertive, maybe you don't get much diet fatigue, but to some extent, it's inevitable. You can almost think of this as you're trading diet fatigue in exchange for getting leaner. Now, diet fatigue is something that even though is inevitably gonna be there, it replenishes itself. So when you're stopping with the diet, when you're no longer dieting and you're fueling yourself, you're well fed, it kind of restores itself and it dissipates. But it's a time-dependent process. It will only happen so quickly. So you cannot rush this process by having a massive binge day on one single day and then all of that diet fatigue is gone. And that's why when you're restricting all the time, you're always on a diet, and then you're having a binge every couple of days or once a week, that one binge is unfortunately not enough to make all of that diet fatigue dissipate, but unfortunately it is more than enough to undo all of the results of your dieting. In fact, it is more than enough to actually reverse all of that effort and make you gain some body fat over time. And that's once again how you end up in the situation of accumulating body fat over time and getting more and more diet fatigued over time, which is, again, just a complete disaster. So if you're in this state, to actually get to the solution, in my opinion, what you should be doing is not further dieting. You might be able to hype yourself up, to really pump yourself up, to motivate yourself, and you might actually be able to accomplish a 2-3 month long diet. But if your head is not in the right space with regards to dieting, then I would not bet on long-term success. So I would say that if you're in this situation, the best thing you can do is to actually give yourself a break, not try to restrict, but actually eat enough, fuel yourself, and recondition your brain into finally thinking, realizing that, okay, we have enough food coming in. If I get the chance to eat enough today, it doesn't mean that tomorrow I will have to starve, because there will be food tomorrow as well. And spend some time in this repleted, well-fed state. And while you're doing this, I would also say it's probably going to be beneficial to take some type of a mental detox as well. So I would say get off of Instagram for a while, get off of YouTube for a while. Don't tune into fitness podcasts, of course, except this one because it's just so good. Just don't follow these pages. Don't watch all of these guys with their phenomenal physiques posing in front of the camera and pinching their stomachs with, 10% body fat, telling you that, oh guys, I put on some fluff, I should go back into a mini cut once again. Give yourself a break from all of these things, because it will just make you insane. It will drive you crazy. And I think if you're tuning into too many of these things while you're trying to do this, you will not only look at dieting as something that is the key to your six-pack, but also as something that's this forbidden fruit that the most awesome people get to experience and they're getting their lean physiques. So I would say give yourself a break from all of these things and just try to live your life like a normal person. Enjoy yourself, watch Netflix or football or MMA, go out with your friends, go out with your family, a couple of times a week, enjoy great food and eat as much as you feel like you need to, sometimes even more if that's needed. But don't try to fix the problem by staying within the same paradigm, because that's the paradigm in which the problem was created in the first place. So sometimes you just need to take a step back to take 2 steps forward. And of course, I would also say that while you're doing this, don't stop training. Hopefully you're not burnt out on training, you're just burnt out on dieting. In fact, you will probably benefit from training because you will be well fed, so you might even build some muscle, put on some strength. Of course, ideally, don't view training as something which now you have to do even more of to deserve those extra calories, and try to focus on your performance. So try to develop a healthy relationship there as well. But don't stop training. But with regards to dieting, I think it is really important, if you're in this state, to not restrict for a while and just give yourself a chance to re-normalize a little bit. Now, is this good news or is this bad news? Well, that really depends on your perspective, because on the one hand, I kind of just gave you the green light to eat more food, which is always good. On the other hand, it can be a bitter pill to swallow, because basically what I'm telling you is, well, you might not be happy with your physique right now, and for now, you should not be doing anything about it. In fact, you should not be restricting, and you might have to accept that you will be stuck with this body fat percentage for a little bit longer. And I completely understand if that's frustrating to hear and it's not the most pleasant thing to hear, but I think that at certain times in our lives, we have to have a little bit more of a longer term perspective and a more adult-like perspective, and say that, you know what, I will have the rest of my life to build the best physique that I want, to carve out this work of art out of my body. It doesn't have to happen next month. And I think that if you manage to get yourself to a healthier place mentally, you will have infinitely better chances of not only achieving the body comp that you want, but actually maintaining it afterwards. I always say that in the fitness world, we focus way too much on the here and now. How is my body looking right now? What is my body fat percentage right now? But really, if your head is in the right space, and if you have the right habits and systems in place, then what your goal physique is right now is just a snapshot. It's just a temporary destination. You might be at 25% body fat, but if your head is in the right place, then the road to 9% body fat is only a matter of time. Success is just a matter of time. On the other hand, I don't care how good your physique looks. Like, you might be a guy at 8% body fat looking phenomenal. You're the best looking dude on Instagram. If your habits are completely messed up and if your head is not in a healthy place, then the road right back to 25% body fat is only a matter of time, much shorter than you would think. So don't only think about how things are looking right now, but try to have a bit of a longer term perspective. So that would be my advice to you if you're in this situation. And one thing I want to clarify for the end, because this video is already pretty long, so I think I might as well address this. Is this advice the best for everybody who is struggling with binge eating? Of course not. And that's the tricky thing in this whole fitness thing, is that you can never put out a piece of advice which will be appropriate for everybody and applicable for everybody, because there are a lot of people who have binge eating issues who have no history of restriction whatsoever. A lot of people are just binge eating and overeating every single day because they just lack inspiration. They are just not happy with how their life is. They look in the mirror and say, man, I hate what I see here. I'm such a mess. I look like shit anyway. I'm just gonna have this extra pizza or ice cream today. What is that gonna do? For these people, the solution that I outlined here might be exactly what they don't need. What these people might need is someone to shake them up and say, man, what the hell are you doing? What are you doing with your life? You could be doing so much better. You know what? From now on, you will be in the gym at least 3 days a week. You're gonna cut out all this processed crap. You're gonna be eating healthier at regular times. We are gonna get you into these healthy habits. And you know what? We're gonna push this fat loss. And in 6 months, you will be a changed person. I can guarantee you that. That is absolutely a legitimate option and a legitimate scenario that can pan out in those cases. But there are many people who have tried to diet again and again. Their last 6 months or even much longer than that has been a giant piece of restriction, but they are not seeing the results because they are falling off the wagon way too often, and they are in this terrible scenario of being completely burnt out on dieting and not having the results that they are looking for. So if you're in that state, probably you're one of those individuals who has to realize that sometimes you need to take a step back so that you can take more steps forward. So that would be my message to you. And I think this was important to clarify because, now that I've been coaching for a few years and I had the chance to work with individuals from all kinds of backgrounds. And unfortunately, sometimes what I experience is even though I have a 100% success guarantee if you sign up with me, I can only have that guarantee if you're actually doing what I'm telling you to do. And some people are just in a state where they are not able to do what I'm telling them to do because they're coming to me in this really non-optimal scenario where they are just not ready to follow any kind of advice that is related to dieting, no matter how well it's set up. And they think that I'm some sort of a magician who has some secret method which allows them to make all of that diet fatigue disappear and get shredded at the same time. It doesn't work like that. In fact, one thing I should clarify, okay, this video is actually gonna last forever. When I'm telling my own story, and I told this story a bunch of times, how I fixed my relationship with food, or at least got it to a much better place than it was before. I told my story a bunch of times that one big key of me not only getting leaner, but also getting to a healthier place with my mindset and my relationship with food was this autoregulatory eating, letting go of tracking down everything neurotically, and that helped me thinking about food less, thinking about my diet less, enjoying my life more, focusing on other areas of my life while getting the body comp that I want. And that's all true. I do stand by that. However, I also did that. Not super consciously, but at one point I said, you know what, I have to stop caring a little bit. So basically I eased up on all the restrictions on myself. I just kind of ate whatever. And I also started to do other fun things. I went out, I went on a couple of Tinder dates. I was eating out a lot more, and I just didn't give a shit about what's gonna happen with my leanness. And probably I didn't do it for as long as I should have done it. Maybe I did it for a month, but even that 1 month of just not caring was infinitely beneficial. And after that, I had such an easier time adhering to a healthy nutritional setup, getting leaner, and getting to a healthier place. So even in my case, that taking a step back part of the equation was there. I didn't just keep taking steps forward. I did have to take the time to take one step back at least. So that would be basically the message. I hope this video was useful, even though it was way longer than maybe it should have been. But anyway, let me know what you think. And if you're ready to crush it, if you're not in this situation, then check out the links in the description for coaching information. Or if you don't want to do that, then at least subscribe and like the video and comment. And we will see each other in the next video.